All right, some ambient street noise from Cairo. Obviously, you know as well as we, demonstrations continue. No real decision point in sight, which is a great time for us to talk to former UN Ambassador John Bolton, who's been a regular contributor to our show. Mr. Ambassador, I imagine you're very busy these days answering questions about Egypt.
Well, it's a very complex situation. America has a lot at stake there. We've got a legitimate concern about the stability of the Israeli-Egyptian peace agreement and what would happen if that broke down, if a radical government came to control in Egypt. We have excellent relations between our military and Egypt's military. I think that's really, at this point, one of the primary channels of communication with the Egyptian government. So a lot rides on how this comes out for the United States.
Well, then let me put the question of the morning that we've put to our listeners to you. Obviously, no matter where else it is in the world, it's 3 a.m. at the White House. The phone is ringing. This is the crisis that we all wondered whether this president would be prepared for. If he were to take that call and then turn to you, what would you advise him to do?
I would say that that there's a lot that rides on the stability of the Egyptian government, that the real regime there is the military, as it has been since the early 1950s, and that simply having a kind of a naive faith that with elections everything will turn out okay for us is wrong. I think that what we really need to do is see just how convinced the military is that it can hold on to power, restabilize the situation, and then hold presidential elections in September. But I think there's a very grave risk this thing will spin out of control if the administration sends mixed signals, and I'm afraid that's what they've been doing. We don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, and honestly, I think it's behind the scenes that the real work is going on here.
Well, do you think that Mubarak can survive? Should he survive? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't think the issue is Mubarak. I really think you have to distinguish between him and the military, and it's the military that's in control. They've now put a trusted military person, former director of intelligence, Omar Suleiman, in as vice president right behind Mubarak. Interestingly, Jimmy Carter said over the weekend he thought Suleiman was a good guy. So the military is ready for a transition, and I think what Mubarak would like to do is stay till the end of his term, have these elections in September, and leave after that. There was a lot of speculation before the demonstration started that Mubarak would retire. He is in his 80s. But I think what provoked people was the idea he was going to try and give this next election to his son. Although there's a lot of uncertainty, that idea is gone for good. So I think there was likely to be a new president, not Hosni Mubarak, but now certainly not his son. The question is, who's the next one? I think the military believes it'll be Omar Suleiman.
Well, let me ask you that, because it seems to me that the conversation, certainly the punditry this morning, leaves us with two choices, neither one of them particularly attractive: a military government or one underwritten by the Muslim Brotherhood, which we know obviously has strong ties to Hamas and may have a very inimical agenda, certainly to Western influence. Is it that simple, or are there other choices for Egypt between those two extremes?
Well, I think it's a lot more complex than that, and I think we're operating in an area of very high uncertainty, and I would underline that. You know, the news media, God bless them, cover the demonstration in Tahrir Square because that's what they can see. So our televisions are filled with pictures of the demonstration and people calling for Mubarak to go. That's certainly a factor in the present calculus, but it's not the only factor, and it's probably not the most important factor. The real issue is what's going on behind the scenes. This is the Middle East, after all. The souk is open. The negotiations are ongoing, with everybody negotiating with everybody. So there are a very wide range of issues to be decided, and a very wide range of outcomes that are possible, and many of them are very bad for the United States.
Another person who's emerged is Mohammed al-Baradei, and he's been described by some as a moderate secular leader, someone who could bridge the gap between Mubarak and democracy. Others say he's in the back pocket of the Muslim Brotherhood. Which side do you come down on when it comes to al-Baradei?
I could go on for hours on this subject. Let me just say that al-Baradei is a political dilettante when it comes to Egyptian politics. He's lived abroad for 20 years or more. He has a lot of international recognition. That's because he's a media hound, and I think that his role here is largely the promotion of Mohammed al-Baradei. I don't think it's a serious answer to the crisis. I think that there's going to have to be some other solution, but because al-Baradei is well known to the international press, they tend to flock to him, and that's one reason I think he's getting this attention.
Well, obviously, if you're the Muslim Brotherhood and this guy has a certain amount of mediageneity, I would think that perhaps you would at least give lip service to his candidacy. But let me ask you about an election as soon as September, Mr. Ambassador. Is there a possibility, if it were a reasonably fair election, that the Muslim Brotherhood could do in Egypt what Hamas has done in the Gaza Strip or Hezbollah has now done in Lebanon?
Well, I don't think we know, honestly. Remember, when the Bush administration agreed to elections in Gaza and the West Bank, it was in part on the basis of very reliable polls that showed there was no way Hamas could win. So with that kind of experience, I would be reluctant. I think it's very important to understand democracy is more than just holding an election and counting votes. Democracy is a culture, a way of life. And it's a very desirable way of life, obviously. Those elements don't yet exist in Egypt. So this fascination with holding an election at the earliest possible point, I think, is misguided. And as Steve Hadley points out in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this morning, the most organized political force in Egypt today, outside of the military, is the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
If you rush to elections, you are giving them an advantage over what everybody complains about is the disorganized state of other opposition political parties. So I think we've got to be very careful here about the inadequate view of democracy, that it's just holding elections at the earliest possible moment.
Is it fair to say that this creates an opportunity for the Muslim Brotherhood, not just here, but perhaps in Tunisia as well, to perhaps achieve a goal that they've been essentially trying to achieve since 1928?
Absolutely. When you're in a position of chaos or anarchy, the advantage goes to the most organized, the most disciplined, in a sense, the most ruthless organization that knows where it wants to get, as opposed to the necessarily messy conditions of democratic political parties. When you have a stable government, that messiness is a luxury you can afford. But when you're faced with a terrorist organization like the Muslim Brotherhood, it's a very different story. And let's also underline here that what happens in Egypt, the largest, most populous Arab state, could have enormous implications in other Arab governments in the region, governments that are friendly to ours, even if they are authoritarian. And the Saudi press agency, for example, reports that the King of Saudi Arabia gave President Obama an earful over the weekend when they talked about the importance of stability in Egypt. If the government there goes, if the Muslim Brotherhood were to take hold, a lot of other Arab governments in oil-producing countries critical to the United States could feel themselves at risk as well.
Great to get your insights today. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you,
Always
Mr.
glad to
Ambassador.
do it.